This week on Snark Squad Pod, we are joined by Nick Jenkins and Rich Camelucci to discuss the beginning of Phase 3 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Welcome back to Snark Squad Pod. I'm Nicole Sweeney.
My name is Manny Niz, and today we are joined by Nick Jenkins and Rich Camelucci.
Hi, I'm Nick Jenkins, host of the podcast Real Bad, where we talk about real bad movies and why they want to hurt us. And I'm happy to be here talking about good movies.
And I'm Rich Camelucci, producer of the live comedy trivia show Let Sleeping Dogs Lie, that is now available as a podcast version as well.
Oh, that's cool.
Nick and Rich are back with us once again for our journey through the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The first two episodes were a little bit like cleaner and easier to do because it was, okay, here's phase 1. Okay, here is phase 2. But now that we are in phase 3, it's sort of exploded. And I'm going to be real and say that I don't know like how cohesive a conversation this is going to be because it's like a chunk of a thing rather than the whole of a thing as it has been in the last couple. But we're taking the first 5 movies of phase 3 because I think phase 3 is ultimately going to be 11 movies. We're doing 4 next time and then 1. How does the math? 10. That's 10. Great. I think there's ultimately going to be 10 movies in phase 3, which is just way too much. So today we are starting with Captain America Civil War, moving on to Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Spider-Man Homecoming, and then finishing with Thor Ragnarok.
Yay!
So nailed it.
Yeah. So you can hear the hesitation in my voice as I'm trying to remember what movies I watched this week. But as per our established tradition, we are stealing the Real Bad format of 60-second plot dumps. And we're going to just start with Nick for Captain America Civil War.
Okay. After the events of Avengers Age of Ultron, Marvel Studios needed to send out an apology. And they did that in the form of Captain America Civil War. At this point, there's a new team of Avengers being led by Captain America. Tony Stark has kind of retired. But then during one of their operations, Scarlet Witch makes a mistake and accidentally lets go of a bomb too soon that she was trying to protect Captain America from, and it blows apart a building, killing a whole lot of people. This sparks the Sokovia Accords, which is a UN thing that basically says the Avengers can't unilaterally act across borders without somebody overseeing them. And this splits the Avengers on
10 seconds.
On one side is Tony, on the other side is Cap, and then there's Bucky in the middle, and they all fight, and it's very sad, and the Avengers die at the end. Well, they don't die. The Avengers title...
The Avengers die.
The Avengers as a group cease to be at the end of this movie.
Perfect. All right. Doctor Strange. Rich.
In the weird flex, but okay version of the Marvel Universe, Doctor Strange is a hotshot surgeon who gets in an accident, busts his hands all up, searches high and low for a way to fix his hand so he can actually be a surgeon again and be whole, while also being incredibly rude to Rachel McAdams, which is a thing that should never be done. He finds himself in... Crap, where was he? Not Thailand, Tibet. Searching for some Eastern solutions. And then he finds himself becoming a mystic wizard and having to just thrown in the middle of an ancient mystic war. And, then he messes up old Hannibal there and then calls the bluff on a giant interdimensional Dormammu thing and wears him down. Time.
Great.
We're doing great, Rich.
This is the least prepared I've ever been.
I love it. It's great. All right. I'm giving Mari Guardians of the Galaxy this time after I botched it so terribly last time.
My last time I had to do a 60-second plot dump, I literally had like a mild panic attack and I'm sick. So I feel like I should get a minute 30.
I'm okay with this.
All right. Only because you're sick.
Okay.
3, 2, 1, go.
At the beginning of the movie, the Guardians are running a job for a race of aliens that mostly reminded me of like Oscar statues. They complete the job, killing an alien monster before he can steal some super special batteries. The Guardians get paid in Nebula, Gamora's sister enemy, who was captured by the Oscars while trying to also steal the batteries. They leave, but Rocket decides to steal some batteries just because, so the Oscars chase them with a lot of ships. They escape because a stranger helps them, but they still crash land on a planet. The stranger turns out to be Peter's real dad, Ego. Ego invites them back to his planet to chat. Rocket, Groot, and Nebula stay behind to fix the ship. The Oscars hire Yondu and his crew to find the Guardians, but Yondu sides with Peter again, and his crew mutinies. So Nebula sides with the Ravagers, and Rocket and Groot are taken hostage. We learned that Eon is a planet god who really just wants Peter for his power, and he has some kind of plan that I don't know, something about expanding into the universe or something like that. Peter fights his dad, and his other dad, Yondu, escapes and comes to help him, and then both of his dads die.
Ta-da!
That's it. You only needed a minute 15, so
Good job.
Yay!
I feel like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is the more intimidating one to actually do. Good job.
yes, absolutely. All right, that leaves me with Spider-Man Homecoming. After his big adventure with the Avengers in Berlin, Peter Parker returns to New York, and he, has to go back to being a teenager, but he wants to be like a full-time superhero. But he's largely ignored by Tony and Happy, his handler, because they're like, no, you're a child. But so he tries to, fight crime where he finds it. Meanwhile, there is a contractor sort of back at the Avengers 1, post Avenger 1. He gets screwed out of a cleanup job. And so he immediately resorts to a life of, crime, making weapons out of alien tech. Peter is trying to stop an ATM robbery and encounters some of these alien tech weapons. And so then he basically spends the rest of the movie trying to track down and stop the people making the alien tech weapons. He tells Tony about this. Tony goes and informs the FBI, but is completely dismissive to Peter and doesn't use his words to say, yo, I got this. So that ends badly. And Peter tracks down Vulture all by himself and saves the day at the end.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
I ran out of time.
We'll have some specifics when we talk about it later.
Okay, and finally, Thor Ragnarok.
After the events of Age of Ultron, Marvel needed to make an apology. So they did that in the form of Thor Ragnarok. Thor has gone off into the universe trying to find the Infinity Stones. He can't find them, but he gets trapped by Serta, who's a giant demon thing, who's really cool, who's going to try to bring about the destruction of Asgard. And in doing this, he learns that Odin's gone. He gets to Loki, and they go try to find Odin. Odin dies, and because Odin dies, their sister Hela is released, who is played by Cate Blanchett, and she's big bad, and she just wipes out everyone on Asgard. And Thor then, in the meantime, goes to Sakaar, where he is forced to do gladiatorial combat with the Hulk, which is awesome. And then he meets a Valkyrie, who they team up with Bruce Banner and Loki and go back, and then they actually have to cause Ragnarok instead of preventing it in order to defeat Hela, because she gets her power from Asgard, and then they go off in a ship and watch Asgard blow up.
Okay, so there it is. We did it. Those are the 5 movies that we're discussing today, and we're gonna do the same thing we did last time, and we're gonna make our way through these movies one by one, starting with Captain America: Civil War. After watching it, I feel that in the last podcast episode, I oversold my anger about this movie.
I'm feeling better.
No, I mean, to be clear, I can't like this movie. Both this and Doctor Strange are movies that I think are good movies, but I can't like them because I have a grudge against it. And that I don't know, there's a lot of good in this movie. However, it's hard for me to have particularly strong positive personal feelings about about this movie because I find the fundamental political plot at the heart of this movie infuriatingly bad. But it's a good movie. So that's the thing. Like, that's the degree to which I oversold my anger, is that I can look at it and say, this is actually a very good movie. But I'm just so disappointed by the fact that this basic argument is Captain America saying, no, we shouldn't have any oversight whatsoever, because it, like, in a lot of ways is completely contrary to, like, the stance that he just took in Ultron. The whole argument doesn't make any sense. The idea of no, we shouldn't have any oversight. It's also frustrating to me because the sort of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. direction that they took this, they had Sokovia, but they also had this whole plot with a registry. And, like, that's an argument that, like, you could get behind, Cap. Like that. It's frustrating to me that they didn't do that. Like, that's the thing. I'm distracted while watching this movie because I want so badly for that to be the argument instead of, like, oversight is bad.
Interesting. I have a question. So, because I didn't watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Is it a registry for the Inhumans?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So in the comic book Civil War, the first Civil War that happened, it was about a registry. It was about basically a superhero registry, and everybody having to basically demask. And that was one of Peter Parker's bigger roles in that original comic. Was he was the one that took off his mask and basically said, yeah, we should be doing this. And so that's interesting that they split that. The major conflict in the comic was between Iron Man and Captain America, but at the heart of it was a registry, which they took to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I find that interesting. Yeah,
I don't know. It's also frustrating. We talked about this in the last Song of Ice and Fire book. Captain America is like a hardcore Jon Snow in this situation, making no efforts to, like, play a political game here of, like, you have an argument and, like, you're not making it literally at all. Also, like, you're a soldier, like, you're an American soldier, and like, you are beholden to U.S. military law. I don't know. Just everything about it is, like, frustrating. It's like, just, if anybody
it should be you, the soldier. Which I feel like, you know, they kind of did that as, like, a fun, not a fun, but like a tongue-in-cheek twist on what you think would be on which side of this issue. There was a lot of this that was fun in a way that just reminded me of Team America World Police, which is like, oh yeah, this has been done with puppets. Which, does anybody remember Team America World Police?
Not at all.
Dimly.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, like halfway through Ultron, I was just like, oh yeah, this is just Team America World Police. And yeah, I'm curious to see, who do you think was ideologically correct? Captain America with no oversight, or Stark playing ball with the world governments?
I'm never on Tony Stark's side. If Tony Stark has a position, my initial reaction is to be skeptical of that position.
And I think that's incredibly founded, considering the fact that we didn't even mention in the last podcast that his whole ethos was peace in our time, which I believe is what Neville Chamberlain said during the Accords, that basically said, hey, Germany, just don't go outside or, you know, don't bring this Nazi stuff outside of Germany, and you're fine. So it's like, oh yeah, Tony Stark's wrong always.
Yeah, Tony Stark is the creation of every problem for the most part. Like, some of it's cosmic in this, I know, but, like, if there's a earthbound villain, I swear to God, it's always Tony Stark. And we'll get to it in Spider-Man. He creates Vulture and Spider-Man. So I'm initially skeptical of it. The way I read it, and I could be wrong, but the way I read Steve's position was not so much no oversight, is that he was also skeptical of the whole thing. And it seemed to be trying to process it and trying to figure it out, and kept feeling like he was getting rushed into making decisions. Now, whether or not that's right or not, I don't know. I just know that
this is my thing with that, is that I don't think the movie sold that plot well. Like, just, like, that's the thing. Like, this whole, like, I agree with the sort of emotional impact of I will always side with Cap over Iron Man, like just in general, because of who they both are as characters. Like, yes, to all of that. But it's just such a like weird, I don't know, gross American exceptionalist nonsense to be like, nah, we could do whatever the fuck we want because we're powerful. That's the crux of it. Like, and it's our job to decide what, like what the right thing to do is, because we have the power to decide what the right thing to do is. And it grossed me out that the movie didn't actually negotiate with what that meant. I don't know. Like I didn't feel like they were actually acknowledging that, like, that is ultimately like the underlying argument is we have the power to decide what is right. Therefore, it is right for us to decide what is right. And like, nope,
right. Yeah.
Nope, I don't like it.
Might makes right, which is not the right direction to go. No, I get that. I just felt that Steve was conflicted. That was my thing. And rewatching it this time, I felt that even more. I didn't feel like Steve was sure about anything. And I feel like he carries the baggage of the Hydra takeover and the insurgency in there, and just knowing like we can't trust governments anymore.
Yeah, that was, I feel like, what's super tracked from Winter Soldiers. Like, I just dealt with this, with putting all this trust into a body of government, and then like, well, it doesn't guarantee that it's ever going to work.
Right. But, to Nicole's point, I do agree that it's like in the real world for sure. I don't care that you just had that happen. We can't just let you guys just go and do whatever the hell you want.
There's an element on which, like, I get it. This is a world with superheroes. So there's a certain amount of suspension of disbelief that you like have to do baked into that. But this as an argument rubbed me the wrong way as the way to do that, which again is why like the idea of turning it into a registry, like that's the kind of thing where you can draw like political analogs that I can be like, wow, yeah, that's like a terrible idea. I get why people would look at that and go, oh, this is a thing we could do.
Especially I get how you could
Steve. Right. But like, yes, exactly. So I don't know. It frustrated me that was the direction that they chose to take it, and it drove me to distraction throughout what is otherwise a really great movie. So I want to like move on from this and to just talk about how this is a great movie. The things that are great about it. I guess, I don't know. Are there any other grievances before we move on to the greatness of this movie?
So I think that this was a movie that had probably some of my favorite scenes, and then some things that I was really frustrated watching, like apart from the politics of it all. I think that also the big bad, whose name I can't even remember.
Zemo.
That whole storyline was so convoluted. It was it relied so heavily on contrivance and just like, everything working out exactly the way that he planned it. But how could he have planned it? He had to like, I don't know, everyone had to be at the right place at the right time. He had to like break into all of these places and like get out of them. And all of it was just so that Tony could see the footage of Bucky killing his parents. But it was like a 27-step plan to get there. And then he just sat back and was like, and now I've broken you apart. And it was just like, I don't know. That whole plot line was really, really, it didn't work for me at all, which sucked because it was like the backbone of the movie. And I think that everything was in service, even these arguments of like who was right between like Tony and Cap, like they didn't really make the argument. The end game was really that they're fighting. That's what the movie wanted me to get to. It was like, they're fighting, and look at this big, cool, awesome fight scene, which was really big and cool, and I loved it. And I see why the movie wanted to get us there, but nothing felt like it was happening gracefully to get us there. It was just all very, I don't know, a little choppy to me. It was a little forced. A lot of it didn't make sense, and I don't know, was it worth it to get to where we got, where they're all fighting each other and it's cool because it's like a dozen Avengers and that whole scene was very well orchestrated? Maybe it was fun, but this wasn't my favorite.
Yeah, the one other gripe that I would have is the fact that Vision, an actual computer man, printed out a recipe.
He's like trying to endear himself to her.
Yeah.
So it's like, look, I'm just like you. I print out my recipes too.
Was anyone else like his costume is ridiculous, but I found it more ridiculous when he was in a suit.
Oh yeah, he's in like a tweed sweater or whatever.
Yeah, it's like way more distracting. But
it's like Mr. Vision's neighborhood.
This, I got to be honest, this movie did it for me. Like, I really liked when we get to the end with Zemo. I love how it introduced Black Panther. I love how it introduced Spider-Man. That was some heavy lifting that it did that I was like really impressed by. I was also, just as a storyteller and a person who loves being told stories, I was so thankful that they took it in a different direction and we didn't have, well, we're fighting a bunch of, Winter Soldiers now at the end. There was that twist.
Yeah.
That it becomes a very personal fight between two people, that they walk in and all of the Winter Soldiers are dead. And that is... Like, I get the, mustache twiddling, is a little too much maybe of this guy who's just, I've destroyed the Avengers. But I don't know. There was something about it to me that felt refreshing, that felt different in a way that really played to my sensibilities.
I think that there are a ton of really fantastic pieces, and whether or not this movie works for you is going to be in how those pieces are assembled. Like I think that seems to be sort of the dividing point. Like, either you're on board with the way they put all those great pieces together or you're not.
I'm on board.
I also want to give a shout out to my favorite Avenger having so many beautiful scenes in this movie, Scarlet Witch. This is the beginning of Scarlet Witch being my favorite Avenger. Starts here. I adore her. That's it. That's really all I had to say. I stand Scarlet Witch.
And those big like set pieces, I thought they needed to nail them, and they did more than that. Not only with the like Winter Soldier chase scenes like towards the beginning of the film, but the big airport battle, when it felt like it was done, it's like, oh, all right, I am satiated. It's like, oh no, we're going to do this again. And it just kept going. It's like, yes, you're right. I wasn't full. Feed me more, please. In a way that just like, it was a good Halloween candy binge. It was delicious.
And it's a real thing that like, I go back to when this kind of all started, with the 89 Batman. If you go back to that, it's amazing to me how much the writers did not understand the characters they were working with. And that sequence in the airport in Civil War is so amazing to me because it's all character based and who these characters are. From Spider-Man to Captain America, there's a great line in Homecoming where Tony says, if Cap wanted to lay you out, he would have. And you can kind of get that sense here that nobody's trying to kill each other. We're just trying to contain, and I really got to hand it off to Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, who have written Winter Soldier, this, and Infinity War and Endgame. Like, we give the Russos a lot of credit, and I think they do a very good job. But like, from a storytelling standpoint of just characters, like, that's what sold it for me. And that's why I was, genuinely upset at the end when you've got these two people who, have never been the greatest of friends, but, were coworkers at the very least, and they're beating the living shit out of each other. Like, it's an emotional moment, and that's done because of the work with characters. So for me, that really shone through in this.
And to be fair, I think that those were my favorite moments of this movie. I think this movie did an amazing job of gathering these dozen Avengers or however many and giving them enough time and really giving them each a personality, even in the choreography of the fight, and everything just felt really true to each of the characters, which I thought was amazing. I hadn't seen Black Panther. I haven't seen that movie yet. So this as an introduction to that character was really great. And I love the way that they just very kind of casually pulled them in without a lot of build up or backdrop. So there were, I think the character stuff in here was really great. It was some of that plot stuff kind of getting there that wasn't fantastic. But yeah, that airport scene, not going to forget it anytime soon.
So, speaking of introducing characters, moving on to Doctor Strange.
Oh, no.
All right, Nick. Why don't you start us off then?
I like Scott Derrickson. He directed this. He seems like a really good person, and he has a good visual eye. I like a lot of this movie. I like the visual effects in it. I think are really cool. I like the set design. I like production design, and I like the idea of the movie. But there are so many, in my opinion, there are so many wasted opportunities in this film. This is the second time I've watched it. And even in this one, I'm going like, why did we do this? This is this. Nicole and I talk about this all the time, that this is Iron Man with magic. That is this story. Like even down to the fucking facial hair. It is the same goddamn story.
And a glowy thing on the chest.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's all there. And I don't like it. We don't need another one of those. One of the things that I can say about Iron Man, even though I'm constantly, pissed off at Tony Stark, is I like that we have that character and it exists on its own in this world. That's great. And then he can interact in this way. But we didn't need another version of that, especially with a character that is and could be so much more.
Yeah, I even have down here on my notes, like, who was the bigger dick overall, Stark or Strange?
Strange said the most hurtful thing, I think.
Yeah.
Out of all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, his line to Rachel McAdams at the beginning, right before he chases her off, is an awful, horrible thing to have said for no good reason.
On the other hand, we just have had more time with Tony Stark to like watch him be a dick. So I don't know. Like, it's how do you really compare?
Exposure.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
I think my main reaction to this movie is, not my main reaction. Why is Rachel McAdams in this movie?
Really?
Like, that was
Why?
I have here. She deserved more, but still elevated the role. Like,
they wasted her. It is
waste.
Such a fucking waste. Like, literally anybody could have stood there and looked mournful. Like,
it's Natalie Portman all over again.
Yes,
it is. It is.
But this is worse. This is
worse.
I think the Thor movies used Natalie Portman terribly. Like, absolutely could have done more with somebody as talented as Natalie Portman. But this was like another level of waste.
She literally doesn't. I think she has the one scene outside of the hospital, and then the whole thing happens. The big showdown at the end. They don't even get a scene to wrap up any of their relationship. That is a plot point that the movie basically went like, this didn't matter anyway, and gave it no resolution whatsoever. Rachel McAdams is still in the ER, basically, just waiting for him to rush in another person to save, I guess.
Yeah, like this whole movie, like I said in the synopsis, this movie is just the encapsulation of weird flex, but okay. Like, you also brought in renowned character actor Michael Stuhlbarg, and you had freaking Benjamin Bratt in a role for like basically no reason. I tried to look up if Pangborn is like anything in the comics or anything like that, and I guess not. I couldn't really find anything in it again, like, unless Rachel McAdams
it's a little like the MCU's version of Taylor Swift's Bad Blood video. Look at all these famous people we know.
Yeah. Well, and like, unless Rachel McAdams' character is like important later on down the road, which they don't not do that, they'll do that every now and then, but like, I just have you have no idea, and there's no way to tell based on the story that this movie was telling. But also, and just as like a movie overall, like, I thought I knew what it was going to be, so I just never really like saw it. I didn't see it in theaters. I just didn't really seek it out for some time, and then I saw it, and then it was very different from what I was expecting. Especially, like, I had this thought of what a Marvel movie was, and it was different, and I enjoyed that. I wasn't expecting visually what it was, and I also, even the climax was sort of like an anti-climax, if that makes sense what I'm saying, and that it started to give you the big battle, but then just turned into this like battle of wills almost.
So this is the thing that I find frustrating about this movie. This is a little bit like Civil War, though very, very different, but in that I'm frustrated. Like, it's a fine movie, but I'm just frustrated because I want it to be like more than it is. So the fact that this character is Tony Stark with magic, and we already fucking have Tony Stark, like, why? But it's frustrating to me because all of like the magic is really cool. Yeah. The stuff surrounding the character of Doctor Strange is really cool. I thought a lot of the visual stuff was very cool. I think the larger idea of the fact that like the villain of this movie is the concept of nothingness. Like, I don't know. That's fucking wild. I think that's a really cool idea, but it just feels so wasted by giving us this character that already exists and who, quite frankly, I'm exhausted with elsewhere. Like the version of this character who already exists is like I'm over him, and reincarnating him isn't the way to fix that.
No. And I mean, even subtle small things would have been a great fix to me. And I get being true to a character, whatever, but please, you hire Benedict Cumberbatch.
Let him be British.
Let him be British. There's a goddamn London, what do they call it? Sanctum Sanctorum?
Yes. Yeah.
Put him there.
Put him there.
Why is he? Why did they have to make him American?
Yeah.
Oh my God. It's funny because I think that could have elevated the film enough for me to not really have a negative view on it, even though there's a lot of story problems I have with it. Like at the end is that he has the will to withstand eternity, basically. Whereas Dormammu doesn't, because he doesn't understand the idea of time. Okay, but that's not what Doctor Strange has been in this whole time. We haven't talked about will. We've talked about that he likes to learn, and he's good at studying and good at figuring things out. That's not what he does at the end. It doesn't pay off with his character in any way. It's just sort of, well, I figured out, I'll just trick you because my will is so great. Is it?
Right.
That's more of a Batman thing, frankly.
Yeah, and he articulates at some point that like he became a doctor by like working really hard, but like we don't actually see him working that hard. Like he's like preternaturally gifted with magic.
Yeah, really all just kind of comes to him.
Which I'm also goddamn tired of.
Yes. How about some work ethic, Marvel? But yeah, I feel like, a lot of this is take it or leave it, but a lot of this is to kind of serve in the same way that the whole Guardians universe opens up a lot of the Infinity Stone things and all that stuff. Like, I really feel like this is a lot to serve the end game of this whole story. Pun, let's say intended.
Well, speaking of Guardians, let's move on to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2.
This is when it finally hit me. Marvel Phase 3, resolving our dad stuff. This is another one of the many uses of like that de-aging technology that they've been using, which I love it, but we can't just use it that much because it's dangerous.
Especially in the wrong hands.
Especially in the wrong hands. Star Wars. This was definitely a lot heavier than the first Guardians, whereas the first one was a little bit more of a romp. This one was like really dealing with, like I said, the dad stuff, even in between the, Hasselhoff references and, an even better Drax performance. That might just be my opinion.
I mean, family stuff in general, too, because you also have the Nebula, like that whole plot line as well. So like, it's just heavy family stuff in general.
And you have Baby Groot that everyone is also trying to deal with.
That was probably my biggest relief, like going into the movie, was just full on expecting to have way too much Baby Groot. This is the moment where this is going to be Marvel's Olaf or whatever. And no, it was like
this was the perfect amount of Baby Groot.
Perfect amount of Baby Groot. Nailed it.
I think I've had conversations about this with Nicole at times where I've said that I didn't really care for this movie. And rewatching it, I don't know why, because I really enjoyed it this time. And that came as a pleasant surprise to me. That de-aging, wait until you get to Ant-Man and the Wasp. Holy God. Boy. It is flawless.
Oh, okay.
And it's like, it's really amazing. But I was surprised at how much of a good time I had with this. It doesn't hurt that I just love Kurt Russell and everything he does. And like the whole cast, I liked the twist at the end that he killed her because he is just a piece of shit. And then he has to, Star-Lord has to deal with the fact that not only did this guy kill his mother, but his father is a piece of shit. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the bonding that Yondu and Rocket had. Like, like all of this, it all came together for me in a way that was surprising, considering the first time I saw it, I walked out going, that was fine.
I really enjoyed this one. I think that this was a movie that in volume 2, I knew what to expect, whereas where I watched the first one, I was like, what the hell did I just watch? Especially like plopped in where it is in the MCU, I was very thrown off. But I think when you get here, it's something that I felt more prepared for. And I really, really liked that even though they kind of give a nod to this whole thing where like Ego might be destroying a world or something. I don't know. He's got some plan that it could threaten people. That never really felt like the thing that was at stake. It was that like smaller scale story of like found family and dads that are shitty and, dads who try their hardest but also threaten to eat you. But what you gonna do? like that stuff.
Happens.
Yeah, that really played well for me. And especially because, I don't know, they are this team that was like thrown together and they're all these like quirky characters. So dedicating a whole movie to like really bringing them together and like understanding each of their characters, I thought was smart and it was super entertaining. And especially after like, the 2 that came before this in my run, where they were trying more of those big superhero-y things and didn't necessarily succeed all the way, to come here and then have this more like family oriented story that did succeed, in my opinion. I think it was like a breath of fresh air in this run.
Yeah, and characters that I hadn't seen before. I hadn't seen Mantis like in any other superhero thing or any movie. Like that was a fascinating character and I loved her to death.
Yeah, and on the topic of characters, I mean, Taserface is one that will probably live throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe in our hearts forever. But I love that this movie, while
Gone
still
but not forgotten.
Exactly.
Taserface.
But I love that, like, even though this is a movie that had all those things, it still had room to breathe for just like bits. Like when Sean Gunn's character is asking Nebula, like, Kraglin is asking Nebula, like, so what are you gonna do with the money? Any other movie, I feel like that gets cut out of. But like, yeah, it was just a bit and it was great. And it was like perfectly placed where it needed to be. And yeah, like Mantis, great. Just having a Ravager named Jeff. And it was Steve Agee. That was great.
A cameo by David Hasselhoff.
And Michelle Yeoh at the end there, also great. Like, yes, delightful little cameos. It's a fun time. It's a fun movie. It's a good placement in this string of movies. Watching these movies in order in this way, like getting to this movie is like, yeah, this is what I want to be doing right now. I'm having a blast. I'm having a super fun time. I, care deeply about all of these characters and I want things to work out for them and their little found family. And I'm like just happy while watching it.
Agreed. It was a little weird that basically Ego, I don't know how else to say it. I mean, he's basically coming on all of the planets.
Oh, great.
I mean, he plants his seed and then it explodes out. Like, even when I was watching, I was like, well, they're really going for it. Okay.
Yeah. What's the
choice?
What's the intergalactic version of going out for cigarettes and never coming back?
Oh. I mean, that was 100% purposeful because they talked about like if he had a penis, like an alien penis, there was an extended like, do you? That was also a great bit.
Yeah, it's a cool movie. And I was very happy to see it. I think anything after Doctor Strange would have perked me up, but this definitely did it.
Which soundtrack do you prefer, Volume 1 or Volume 2?
Oh, man, I'm a Fleetwood Mac person, so Volume 2 is really... the chain is in this, and yeah. I love that song, so I'm leaning towards Volume 2. I don't know. Anyone else with opinions?
No, I think it's time to move on.
Fuck you, Rich and Nick.
Well, I mean, for a movie that the soundtrack does play such a large part in, I agree. I agree with Volume 2.
Rich, I'll email you. We'll have this whole conversation in email. Sounds good.
So... next on our tour through the MCU, Spider-Man Homecoming.
This is the only one of the movies in this phase so far that I saw in theaters. And I had like zero context when I watched it. So rewatching it, I was like, oh, like that whole beginning like 10-minute sequence where he's just like going back and like showing the fight. I was like, oh my God, everything is clear now. It was great. But I really enjoyed this when I saw it in theater. I enjoyed it when I rewatched it with my family, and I enjoyed it when I rewatched it for the third time for this podcast. So this is, I think, maybe one of the more rewatchable MCU movies, because it is like kind of that blue sky, just fun kind of type of thing. I love Peter Parker in high school. I love that there's like a younger superhero, and I think they did a lot of that like high school stuff pretty right, and especially with his best friend and the sidekick, all of that was great. Tony Stark, take him or leave him, but here he was again. I don't know, but I really like this one.
I really enjoy the way that they played out the generational thing about him being like a younger superhero, especially in the context of Civil War. Like you have, the Captain America, Iron Man fight. And now here you have Spider-Man, who is 15 in this 15 in this movie, and as you have the clear generational divide, and I like the fact that Aunt May is like, obviously she's the adult in his life, but also she's young and hot relative to like an adult that's watching this. I don't know, like the way in which this movie set up the generational idea of you've been following all these heroes for all this time, and now we're giving you a glimpse of like the future of things still to come as the sort of original crop of heroes are slowly starting to maybe age out of their status.
I mean, hopefully.
Yeah, I don't know.
Whenever I would have conversations with my friends that have been reading comic books since they were little, a lot of them would say that Spider-Man has always been their favorite and continues to be their favorite. And, having just only the movies to go off of, was already okay. Yeah, I kind of see it. And like, it wasn't until this movie that it really like hit me, just all the things that Spider-Man has to balance. Like you said, 1 second he is in Germany fighting alongside and against like the most powerful beings on the planet. And then a week later, he's back home and he can't let his aunt find out, or else he won't be allowed to anymore. And that's such a weird, fun fantasy that's like totally... It's got a great access point because, we've all been through school and all the school stuff. I want to specifically ask Mari and Nicole, because of what you mentioned on your kind of year in review pod that came out. Is this a coming of age movie? Would you call it that?
Yes, totally.
Hell yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, this is 100% a coming of age story.
I think so too, because I think in a lot of ways, the whole thing is that like Spider-Man has to figure out what kind of hero he is and, who he is without the suit, and all of those big themes are very coming of agey. And I think that I like that part of the central like problem or thing that he's trying to get over is that like, parents just don't understand, but like Tony Stark just doesn't understand.
Yes.
Like nobody's listening to him, right? Like they're dismissing him because he's a kid. And that is such a central coming of age, like little kid or, younger person, like storyline is like, adult is not listening to me. My problems aren't big enough, that whole kind of thing. So,
and the only one that does and actually sees him as a real threat is Vulture, is Toomes.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of the villain, I love the way that they flip the sort of villain gloating script at the when they have their first, like their final confrontation part 1 in the building, where Vulture's like talking for a really long time, and usually this is like they're talking for a really long time and this is their undoing is usually how the villain gloating thing works out, but it was him talking for a long time to facilitate his own end. And like to facilitate Peter's like undoing. I don't know. We joke a lot on the blog about all of the examples of the big book of villain gloating, as we call it. So seeing an example of villain gloating where it was like the villain is aware of what they're doing and is doing it on purpose, I enjoyed it. I appreciated it.
Another trope that gets flipped that I really like is the whole thing where like the villain is also like his date to Homecoming's dad. Like that's great. That reveal. I know the car ride ride was fantastic. And the fact that he is sitting there piecing together that this is actually Spider-Man, when in so many other times in superhero stories, you're like, oh my God, it's so obvious. Why doesn't anybody pick up on it? The fact that he's driving them to homecoming and he's like, and you left the party mysteriously, you say, and he's like putting all the pieces together. That was a great little trope flip there too.
Yeah, Nick actually texted me when he was watching that part to comment on the superb acting. Okay,
look here. This has... I don't want anybody to be mad at me.
Uh-oh.
I have some problems. One of them is not the acting. I think this has two scenes that are better acted than, unless something is escaping me, anything else in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The car ride, watching Michael Keaton's performance in that car ride is great. Like, it is hands down a really well acted, well shot, well cut sequence. Like, holy crap. The other is, I sort of forget that Tom Holland, who plays Spider-Man, is a really good actor. And that moment where he walks in and he's had the suit taken away from him and he has to come up with the lie of, I lost the Stark internship. That moment is incredible. And to watch what his eyes are doing and to watch him perform it's just really, really good. That being said, all of the Spider-Manning stuff in here I think is terrific. I think it's the best example of Spider-Man we've ever had on the big screen. I also really love the villain. I also love that in his monologue, you're kind of going, you're not wrong. You know, like,
and I feel like this is probably the first in a stretch of villains like that for Marvel.
Yeah. And, you know, and he is not necessarily a murderer. He does murder someone. He didn't mean to. But by the end, he is, obviously. But my problem is also, like, I'm tired of a few things. I'm tired of women in these movies existing to be ogled. I'm tired of, like, that was my big thing as I was watching it. I was just like, okay, here's another joke about Aunt May being sexy. Here's another joke about Aunt May being sexy. Here's her being hit on again and hit on again. When in the fact of the matter is, yes, Marissa Tomei is a beautiful woman, but so is everybody in this film. Everybody is good looking. So, you know, it's a weird thing to me. We are introduced to Elizabeth as Ned and Peter are ogling her. And I'm like, yes, I know that happens, but we as people who create media don't have to make it happen that way on screen. We don't have to showcase it. So, and then, like, Elizabeth is just there to be rescued or just there to be property of her father or just there to be sought by Peter. And then, I mean, really, with the exception of Michelle, who we find out is MJ, like, they also don't have a lot of, like, anima. There's nothing there. And by the end of it, I was just like, yeah, the Spider-Man part of this is good. The Vulture part of this is good. But it's goddamn 2017 when this came out. Are we really just, is that what we're doing with female characters? And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm watching so many bad movies right now who deal with women badly that this kind of thing jumps out at me. But I was really struggling with it. And I texted Nicole at the time and was like, I'm not enjoying this as much as I did when I saw it in the theater.
I think part of why it didn't stand out to me quite as much in this is watching it directly on the heels of Doctor Strange, right. First of all, which, yeah, that's a whole other thing. We didn't even talk about the whitewashing component of Doctor Strange.
Yeah. But I'm going to go find some Eastern medicine and have as few Eastern people as possible.
Right. Just going to throw that out there because I would be remiss if we did not. But also, there's that. I 100% agree to the point of Elizabeth, though. Like, yes, absolutely. Elizabeth is just, she's an object that is sort of bandied about in this movie and not well used at all. I think to this point, my actual biggest frustration is Pepper Potts.
Oh, and that was brought in at the end of the fucking exclamation point on my problem. Go ahead, please tell us about this.
I ran out of time in my 60-second plot dump, but the movie ends with, like, Tony realizing that he should take Peter seriously, and, like, there are so many ways that you can do that you can have them having this, like, big heart to heart, and, you know, like Peter getting that validation that he was after, and, like, that's great. Yes, I understand that is the correct way to wrap up this story, right? But they did this by also by taking him to upstate New York, where like Tony was going to introduce him as an Avenger, but then they don't, because instead, like, Peter doesn't want to, he wants to go back to New York, whatever, be a teenager. And Pepper is there, and like now they're gonna get engaged or whatever. I don't know. Pepper Potts, who has been name dropped in the last like couple movies that Tony has been in as like, I don't know, like we're on the rocks, like things aren't great with us. But the last thing she actually did was, controlling like the fleet of Iron Man suits at the end of the last Iron Man movie. That was her like last actual appearance. And then we go from that.
She was like a fire person.
Yeah, like she was fucking badass. And we go from that to her just being like this casual reference, and then she shows up and everything's fine, we're gonna get married. It's just Pepper Potts deserves so much better than this. And this goes back to my larger frustrations with like Doctor Strange as a character and like the aggressive like white dude-ness of all of these movies. I am just so tired. I'm just so tired. The people who aren't them, who appear in these movies, are so badly used, and it's exhausting.
Yes, it's exhausting.
When in looking at the slate of movies moving forward after Avengers Endgame, it seems as though a lot of those things are at least being alleviated. But yeah, it wears. It wears.
Well, it does.
Time will tell.
Yeah. We would be remiss if we weren't to also say that it puts an exclamation point on the problem with Tony Stark in a storytelling context, where he's lecturing Peter about responsibility and about consequences and about he doesn't know what he's doing. And then we're witnessing as there are never any fucking consequences for anything Tony ever does. Everybody forgives him for Ultron. Everybody forgives him for, pissing off the wrong people and creating supervillains. Everybody forgives him. Pepper forgives him for being an addict, basically, which is what she was accusing him of. And then he's like, well, I'm going to do it anyway. And then apparently she's just fine with it, which we don't even get to see her rationale. She's just a prop for him. And that moment in the movie, I checked out. I was like, I don't care anymore. You don't care about Pepper, obviously, filmmakers. So why should I?
And it's unfortunate because it drags down like what is ultimately a Spider-Man movie, right?
Yes.
Like, this isn't an Iron Man movie. But moving forward to the best one. Look, I don't care if anyone disagrees. You're wrong. The best one. It's the best one. Thor Ragnarok. It's the best one in part because it is all of these complaints about badly used female actors and characters. Tessa Thompson is very well used, and she's fucking badass, and she's cool, and this movie is fun and cool and great. I don't really even have anything else to say besides I just love like literally every minute of this movie. Watching it again, I was just so happy, and I am glad that like this is the note that the note we're going to end it on is this amazing movie.
When I first watched Ragnarok, it was when we were doing the Thor thing. So this was it was like Thor 1, Thor 2, and then out of nowhere, Ragnarok. And then so watching now the MCU in order, this feels more like a natural progression. Like, I feel like Guardians of the Galaxy and some of the other stuff that we've watched led up to Thor Ragnarok. In a way, there was more of a prelude into this movie existing in the MCU. And which is funny because, the Thor movies, are related to each other, but they didn't feel that way when you watched them back to back. So I feel like I have a newfound appreciation for this movie just because I've watched everything else in between.
Yeah, I don't know if this movie is the best, but it's definitely my favorite. Out of all of the MCU films, this is my favorite. It is an incredible joy. There is so much joy to be had, but it also does this weird thing of it is funny and fun and joyful, but it is also awesome.
Yes.
Like, it has all of those big superhero moments and supervillain moments that are just so cool on screen. And the Hulk is cool and awesome, and it's all awesome, but it's also freaking hilarious. So you're bouncing back and forth between absolute ridiculous awesomeness and then very cleverly used improv to create wonderful characters, great casting, great direction. I also don't know if I have anything else to say.
It's just good.
It's so good.
This was probably my third time watching it, and yeah, more so than the other two. What probably stuck out to me the most was like how many different types of movies they fit into this movie. Like you had the one half that felt very, sort of traditional kind of Marvel Thor type movie, everything with like Hela, and then you had basically like an homage to canon films from the 80s with all these wild costumes and like crazy like practical effects and stuff, and yeah, it just like blended together in a way that like it probably in a lot of other hands wouldn't have. Shouts to Taika Waititi for like directing this crazy concept of a movie, and I loved seeing all of the Taika players. Shouts to Hunt for the Wilder People. Check that out if you haven't. It is a goddamn delight of a movie.
It's a little gem.
It really is. And like most of, the play within a play at the beginning, I think is still like the thing I look forward to the most with,
with Matt Damon.
Yeah.
Which I loved just dropping that bomb on the Thor podcast that we did. It was so good. Tickling. It was tickling.
I can't say enough nice about it.
I just have to get my one. Every time we talk about Thor, I have to say this. It's like obligation for me. As much as I love like the tonal shift that we get here, we get Thor being, focusing a little more on that humor we saw peppered in his other movies. The shift for Loki going from I was the direct cause of the death of thousands of people in the Avengers to kooky anti-hero in this one is it's one of my least favorite things about the Thor movies and maybe the MCU as a whole. I don't know. The more exposure I get to Loki, he's almost like an Iron Man for me. And the more that I see him, like I get why people like him. And I do appreciate like his story in this movie if it were contained, but the progression of him being like, a monster in the Avengers to just like, no, he's just misunderstood little brother.
Honestly, I don't even think that is narrative. I think that is like all Tom Hiddleston. Like that is all Tom Hiddleston's performance. I think there's a little bit there narratively, but like Hiddleston is bringing something to that performance that is making the character, I don't know, I think more intrinsically charismatic and that is like counterbalancing the fact that, like he's like directly responsible for so much terrible shit, but like LOL, little brother. No, I don't know.
Well, and look forward to more Loki in general, because they announced that there's going to be a straight up Loki show with Tom Hiddleston on the Go Disney app.
The real news for me is that there's going to be a Scarlet Witch show, which like I don't want to be giving another streaming service my money, but like I have to.
They're leaving you no choice.
I can't not watch the Scarlet Witch show. So, it is what it is.
It's a weird thing with Hiddleston and Loki, because we've talked about this before with like charming people sort of masking what they're saying with their charm. And so you end up kind of going, yeah. And then a few minutes later going, wait a minute.
Wait.
And I also think that that's the only criticism I would levy at this. If I had to levy a criticism at this film, it would be that the turn is to Thor's turn. To be, yes, we're fighting side by side now. And the way the movie presents that, like, I think there still could have been some stuff with like, even by the end of it, he's a prisoner, but maybe he is a willing prisoner or something. I don't know. I agree that it's that he's a mass murderer. Like,
Yes.
And yes, he did have a fairly traumatic revelation, but that doesn't mean I know a lot of very good people who have had traumatic revelations.
I will say that to that point, I am somewhat willing to forgive this movie that because this movie disposes of, at the beginning, everyone who has considerable experience with Loki's background, with the exception of Banner. Like, Banner is the only person who is around at the end who has been, witness to Loki being the worst forever.
And he's very suspicious of him.
Right, and he is very suspicious. For Thor specifically, the dynamic of this being his brother, like there's a level at that, like I can forgive the idea that Thor is going to be much more willing to keep giving him second chances on those grounds specifically. So
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
And also in the wake of, their dad dying. And
right. This is it. This is all the family he's got left.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Well, and your murdering sister.
Yeah.
But like,
right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. In the wake of
the other monster in the family.
Given the choices of your family,
other sibling, like I'll choose the one that I could get help with.
Right.
And I do like the fact that we more of this dad stuff, but I love the fact that this is all Odin's fault. Odin really was terrible. And I appreciate that the movie doesn't shy away from that. Like they kind of tried to in the first one a little bit, like he's still majestic and whatever. But then by the end of this one, you're like, nah, Cate Blanchett's character, yeah, she's evil and she's bloodthirsty, but she had some points.
Yeah, at least she's honest about it.
Yeah.
Odin made her, you know. Yeah. Odin is responsible for
She was
this.
so good.
Oh my
in
God.
this movie. I know I probably still need to see Carol as well. But if Carol's anything like this, yeah, I'm going to love it.
You can't say enough nice things about Cate Blanchett for me.
You should probably go see Carol, but I don't want you to go in expecting Thor Ragnarok.
I guess
that is maybe the note we're going to leave this on. I'm bewildered, but like really excited about Cate Blanchett. And that's like, I feel, a good place to be in life in general. Does anybody else have anything they want to say about Thor before we wrap this?
The clothing gag with Bruce Banner is one of the highlights for me, and just how that joke kept coming back was wonderful.
Piss off, Ghost.
No. Yeah, that too. But I just love that he's constantly tugging at his crotch because Tony wears his pants too tight. I love that. That is so funny. It's a great little moment.
Yeah. So, yes. And that he embraced it fully throughout.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, we're going to end this episode of the podcast. When we reconvene, when the Avengers assemble again, we will be discussing the next 4 movies, the 4th of which is not out yet. So our next episode is going to be following the release of Captain Marvel. We will be talking about Black Panther, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Avengers Infinity War, and Captain Marvel. So we will see you all again in March when that happens. Thank you to Nick and Rich for joining us, and to all of you for listening. If you are enjoying this podcast, we would greatly appreciate it if you joined our community on Patreon, where we've got some bonus content and polls to vote on future podcast media. And you can find out more at patreon.com/SnarkSquad. We would love to hear all of your thoughts on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You can find a post dedicated to this episode, as well as any show notes, at SnarkSquad.com, or you can find us on Twitter at Snark_squad. I am at Sweeney Says.
You can find me at My Name is Marines.
You can find me at NG Jenkins.
And you can find me at Rich Cammy.
Thank you, as always, to Stefan Chin for the delightful theme music that is playing us out right now, and we will be back in your podcast feed next week. Bye.
Bye.
Remember, Snark Squad is not a website. It's a people.